Thank you, everyone, especially to those who came early. I'm sure that a couple more will be trickling in soon. Welcome to the GEO-LDN Monthly Online Seminar, the first ever, where we focus on land degradation neutrality, LDN for short, and the toolbox approach. A quick reminder that this session will be recorded, so if you would like to turn off your cameras for yourselves not to be in the recording, you have a right to do so. You may also the chat will not be recorded. It is only what is being said. Then we will end the recording once the seminar is over, and the Q&A session will not be recorded. So there's no need to worry about that. Some housekeeping rules. If you have a question, please use the chat box. If you do not have access to the chat box, raise your hand at the end during the Q&A, and we will be able to answer any questions that you have regarding what the speakers have said today. Please do keep your microphones muted while the speakers are speaking or when another person is speaking. Otherwise, we will have to ask you to mute them. Raise your hand when you want to speak. You can use the raise hand function on MS Teams, or as we said, put the question in the chat box. We'll make sure to answer them. And if possible, please switch on your camera during the Q&A so that we know who is asking the question. Today's agenda, welcome and intro will be by Antje Hecheltjen, then working group 3 and LDN toolbox approach will be demonstrated by Alex Veloff. Then we work on towards interoperability, the tools for LDN approach by Gabriel Daldegan, and with a Q&A section involving everyone who is here, hopefully, as well as some concluding remarks by Bernd Eversmann. Bernd Eversmann and Antje Hecheltjen, for those who do not know, are part of the GEO-LDN Secretariat, including myself, and Alex Veloff and Gabriel Daldegan are part of the GEO-LDN Leads and Support Group. First coming up today is Antje Hecheltjen, the GEO-LDN co-chair, head of GEO-LDN Secretariat, and the project manager at GIZ, the German Agency for International Cooperation. She's also on the GEO-LDN flagship leads group. Please go ahead, Antje.
Thank you very much, Lena. So I'm really excited that this is happening now today. We have been wanting to organize these online seminars for a long time, and now it's the first GEO-LDN online seminar today. So I'm really excited that this is happening, and great to see that there are so many participating here already. I just want, so that we are all on the same page, I want to give you a quick overview of where we are coming from. So what is GEO-LDN? Many of you might know, but some might not know that much. So just to say that GEO-LDN is serving parties to the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification, UNCCD in short. And it was mandated by a conference of the parties of the UNCCD, which is the decision on the left, so where the COP invited the Group on Earth Observations to support UNCCD parties in implementing the convention by providing space-based information and in situ measurements to fulfill the reporting requirements for SDG indicator 1531, which is on LDN. So the main decision is on reporting. And it's about fostering national data capacity building, development of standards and protocols, and data access. So based on this decision, GEO-LDN was founded, and including 3 working groups, one on capacity building, one on data quality standards, one on data analytics. You will hear Alex soon, who is co-leading the working group 3 on data analytics. We have some achievements, but there's not so much time to go into that. You will receive some information on that in the chat. I just want to highlight here that GEO-LDN works on 2 pillars. So one is supporting the parties in their reporting on LDN for national reports, and the other is to use Earth observations data to inform decision-making and planning to reach LDN. So one is on monitoring and reporting the indicator, and one is on using the data to implement the Sustainable Development Goal. Yeah, next slide. So if just in a nutshell, really very shortly, what LDN is about. This is what Baron Orr, the lead scientist of UNCCD and lead author of the scientific framework on LDN, always says is LDN is about doing the right things in the right places at the right scale. And GEO-LDN, in the next slide, is about the right information for doing the right things in the right places at the right scale. So it's very much about balancing the conflicting goals in a landscape. So you see the pictures down there on nature protection, agriculture, and housing cannot all be done in one place. So it has to be balanced in a landscape by a planning approach. And this is what LDN is about. Just 2 slides quickly of how GEO-LDN creates impact. We are connecting communities and different sectors at global, national, and subnational level for a continuous learning process and peer-to-peer exchange on Earth observations for informed decision-making to reach multilateral environmental and development goals at the national and subnational level. So connecting the communities means we are connecting the Earth observations community, which is the GEO community, with the community on integrated land use planning, ILUP, and with the environment community, because we believe, and UNCCD believes, and also the United Nations Convention on Biodiversity in their new global framework believe that spatial planning or integrated land use planning is a core vehicle to implement multilateral environmental goals such as biodiversity or LDN. So we built this global network for integrated land use planning. It was the result of a workshop series that we had last year. And we co-organized this one with UNCCD, FAO, VOCAD, ELD, and GEO-LDN. This LinkedIn group, this is realized in a LinkedIn group, this global network. And we are trying now to build this community over a 4-year period, continue building this community and having this community involved in a continuous learning process together with partners. So it's not only this virtual LinkedIn group, these monthly seminars that we started today is part of the whole process, and we will also organize yearly dialogue forums. In addition to that, we are also targeting young professionals, or we're targeting students. So the working group 1 of GEO-LDN just announced that applications are open for a new postgraduate program on LDN at the University of Energy and Natural Resources in Ghana. And we are targeting a national intersectoral teams in governance, and this we do through a capacity accelerator network together with the global partnership, and we do training of trainers and building up regional help desks, starting with RCMRD in Kenya. And all of that leads to a user-centered design for the technical parts. Just before going to this slide, I would take a minute because I would really like to see whom we have here in the group, because it's not only about us telling you something, but it's also about recognizing and acknowledging who is here. So I would really like to see that everyone turns off the cameras, and if you are providing or analyzing Earth observations, or if you are developing algorithms or Earth observation tools, then you turn on your camera so that we see everyone who is part of the Earth observations community just turning on the camera so we see who we are here. That's nice to see, because I didn't see who is here in the call, so it's nice to really see now all your faces. That's cool. So very warm welcome to our Earth observation community part of this of the participants. Now I would ask you to, and we have a very young Earth observation specialist there also. Welcome to the children also. So now turning off the cameras now again, and now I would like to see who is part of this land use planning community. So anyone who has ever actively participated in an integrated land use planning process, please turn on your cameras. So I see we have some who are experts in Earth observations for integrated land use planning, and some people who are really into in governmental processes for land use planning. And that's really great to see that we have some cameras on here as well. Very warm welcome to all of you who are part of the integrated land use planning community. And then you switch off the cameras again. And then I would be interested to see who of you is involved in national reporting. So who's responsible in your governments on national reporting on LDN, SDG indicator 15.3.1, biodiversity, or also climate, or if you are from a national statistics office. So it's not surprising that this group is not very big, because it's not but it's growing now. So it's growing. So there are also some double some people involved in both in reporting and planning processes. So that's good to see, and that's how it should be. Thank you. And now last bubble that I showed, who of you, so switch off the cameras again, who of you does supporting countries on reporting count? Yeah. So now who of you is working on environmental issues? So for example, land degradation, climate change, or biodiversity, be it from a scientific point of view, or in a UN agency working on that. Great. So summary, let's see, at least this part, we succeeded to bring those three communities together. They are still growing, but at least I'm really happy to see that that you can recognize yourselves within one of the bubbles, most of you. Very welcome to the, very warm welcome also to the environmental community group. Thanks. And now just a last question. So anyone who hasn't turned on the cameras because you don't feel you belong to any of the groups that we just mentioned, so you all turn off the cameras again, and just anyone who doesn't feel represented in any of the groups would turn on the camera now. Stephen, you already were in the Earth observations community. Okay, maybe you want to share in the chat of which part you feel you would be better, which keyword would better describe you. Thank you very much. This was just a small interactive and showing that this is really important to us to build a community with these online seminars and with all the other activities that we are doing. So we can go back to the presentation. And with this community, with all of you, you will see later on also how you can become more actively involved if you want. Bernd will show this. We are adhering to the digital principles, especially designing with the user, reuse and improve what's already existing, and working on local data ecosystems. And this is the way how we build the LDN toolbox. I will not talk much about it because it will be the main topic of Alex and Gabriel later on. And with the aim to reach multilateral goals. So the SDGs with all the environmental SDGs, the planet SDGs as the basis. So that's all for the introduction, and I would really like to welcome now the main speakers. So it's first Alex Zwolew, who is the Senior Director of Resilient Science Conservation of Conservation International's Moore Center for Science. He integrates data from satellite sensors, environmental monitoring, and social survey to understand how changes in landscape affect biodiversity, tropical forest. And he's interested in furthering the development of new tools that ensure the best possible information is available to decision makers. Alex received his PhD in geography in a joint program at San Diego State University and the University of California, Santa Barbara. He has a master's in climate and society from Columbia University, where he studied how to use computer modeling in rural development planning. So he is the expert for this topic here. Welcome, Alex.
Definitely. Thank you, Antje. And I don't know that I would say I'm the expert. I'd say an expert, perhaps, but definitely have a distinguished group with us today. So thank you for the introduction, Lena and Antje, and great to see such a good group of folks online with obviously a very diverse range of interests, which is very exciting. As was already mentioned, this of course is our first seminar in the series. So very excited to get to share with you today some of the work that's happening within Working Group 3, but just to say, of course, again, this is the first in a series for sure. So we're going to try to give an introduction to the work we're doing around the LDN toolbox, but of course there will certainly be more to come. And of course, we'll have some time for questions at the end as well. So curious to hear thoughts, areas where we might expand, modify, etc. Definitely want to get feedback from folks today. So we can switch to the next slide. These first few, and I'm likely going to go through this a little bit quickly, given the folks that we have online today. I'm assuming if you're here, you likely have some familiarity with LDN and with the challenge of land degradation writ large, but still just to give a little bit of framing background in terms of how we think about land degradation. And some of this should be clear from the introduction that we just got from Antje. But just to say, so this is, of course, the definition of land degradation based on the convention text in the UNCCD. But just to say, we're not talking here only working lands, we're not talking just forests, we're not talking solely pasture, etc. So this really, we're thinking holistically here about how we define land degradation, of course, hence our interest in integrated land use planning, integrated land management. So go to the next slide. And again, don't want to belabor these points, but of course, land degradation, a global challenge recognized by countries around the world. This is likely actually a somewhat optimistically low estimate rather in terms of the impacts of land degradation, over 1 billion people per year, impacts in terms of carbon, and of course, high costs as well. And this is actually coming from the economics of land degradation, the group that Antje mentioned earlier, which has done global analyses of some of the impacts of land degradation based on the work of some of the partners we actually have here on the phone today. Skipping to the next section. So in terms of why we all care and are here today in terms of trying to address this challenge of land degradation is, of course, that we all know from our work on the ground that preventing degradation and restoring degraded lands is really a key solution in terms of improving the livelihoods of people. There's key impacts that land degradation has on human well-being, on livelihoods, and so protecting and restoring land and protecting the critical ecosystems that people depend on is really critical, both in terms of livelihoods as well as in terms of the impacts that land degradation has on other areas, such as, of course, climate change. So to the next slide. So how do we address this? Well, of course, one theme that the globe has really agreed to through the Sustainable Development Goals is this idea of land degradation neutrality, or LDN. And so the idea here is that by 2030, we'll have no net loss of lands to degradation. So what you can see on the right hand is what we refer to as the LDN response hierarchy. And basically, this is acknowledging the idea that when we think about actions to avoid, reduce, reverse degradation, we're really thinking of this as a hierarchy. It's always going to be cheapest and most effective to avoid degradation in the first place, But of course, we also know that some degradation can't be avoided. Some may be needed so that we can support challenges around development, etc. So then the second step in the hierarchy is reduce, the idea being that we can reduce degradation where possible. And then third, reverse. So this idea of really restoration and rehabilitation of lands that were degraded in the past. And one key feature of LDN is this idea of counterbalancing. So, and actually, I'm sorry, on the prior slide, this idea essentially that when we think about actions to avoid, reduce, and reverse, we're really trying to ensure that we have this idea of no net loss. So essentially, if we're losing an area of highly productive land to degradation, consistent with the LDN philosophy would be then trying to perhaps restore an area of land of similar land potential, similar productivity. So skipping to the next slide now. In terms of how we actually address this and monitor this, the conversation has revolved around 3 different indicators for SDG 15.3.1, which again is just that SDG goal around land degradation neutrality. 3 indicators, you'll just see them listed here. I'm actually not going to belabor this too much in this presentation, but just to say that much of the conversation is oriented around these 3 high-level indicators: land productivity, land cover, and soil organic carbon. And then the final estimate of the area of land degraded is derived by combining these 3 together. So essentially this idea of one out, all out. So the idea here is just to say there are agreed upon indicators to assess achievement of LDN, but of course then the challenge is, how do we actually operationalize this? How do we actually support land use planners, countries, governments in understanding what progress is being made toward achieving LDN and how to actually plan and implement projects on the ground consistent with achieving LDN. Next slide. So the idea here that we've come up with, and of course why we're here today, is this idea of a toolbox. So why do we actually need a toolbox if we're going to meet this goal of achieving LDN? So one of the challenges that we've identified, and actually Anshe already spoke to a little bit in her introduction, is this idea that decision context is really key. So if we're thinking about tools that can support this idea of planning, monitoring, evaluation, etc., spatial scale, for example, really matters. Are we talking about something at, say, a project level, maybe a project area within a particular district of a country? Are we talking about national level planning? Is it something that's regional level, maybe multiple countries together? Is it something in between? Who's the intended user of the work that we're doing? Are we talking about something that's targeted towards, for example, reporting, as was mentioned earlier? Are we perhaps thinking about something in a country in which governance has devolved down to a lower level? Maybe it's a land use planning process at a district level government type of scenario. Are we talking about reporting to the UNCCD, to a donor, an investor? There's lots of different use cases in which this type of spatial analysis might be needed. And then, of course, related to this, what's the ultimate goal? There's needs around planning, around monitoring and evaluation, learning, reporting, so many different areas that could potentially be supported by some of the tools that have been developed to help support achieving LDN. And then, of course, lastly, and this is one that we're still wrestling with within Working Group 3 is, and of course, we're an initiative of the group on Earth observations, remote sensing data in particular. Satellite data plays very heavily into our analyses. But what about data from the field? How do we actually integrate information that may be already housed within national governments from past surveys, new data that may be collected? Is there interest in combining this with remotely sensed data sets? How do we actually support this? So going to the next slide. So just to make this a bit clearer, I've drawn here made up country. So if you look at these 3, 4, 5 different, actually if we could just, well, actually this is fine. These 5 different areas, for example, are, you can imagine as being districts within a country. And then what I've tried to show here is there's different types of analyses that might need to be supported. So if you can focus first on that lower left and that blue dot. For example, if we're thinking around project planning, and this is by no means an exhaustive list of available tools, but if you're thinking about planning a particular project, that blue square down in the bottom left, for example, you may be drawing on tools like Land PKS, WOCAT, Clumondo, Loop for LDN. I'll speak to these in a bit more detail in a second, but just to say that there are different tools available that may support that process. On the other hand, if you're thinking more about how we might facilitate learning and exchange among a group of projects, so looking at those orange squares, the 5 of them, there's tools like, for example, WOCAT, which is the recognized database by the UNCCD for facilitating aggregation of information around sustainable land management approaches and technologies. There's other tools like the Framework for Ecosystem and Restoration. I like the proposed new country name. Thank you, Ajay. The work of Restore Foundation, so many different tools in that space. If we think then, on the other hand, of regional planning, and so now if we're looking at that upper left orange shape and that bottom left sort of pinkish shape and that blue outline I've drawn around them, there's tools like Loop for LDN, Clumondo, which is land change modeling package, Trends.Earth that might inform that process. And then similarly on the bottom right, reporting to UNCCD, there's different other tools that may come into place, like WOCAT, Trends.Earth, and then project level M&E, different suite of tools like CEPAL, et cetera. So again, just to say that there's a suite, we've recognized there's a suite of different tools and approaches available in this space. And what we recognized was really this need to facilitate their use and uptake, and then also, where possible, try to facilitate having these tools speak to each other in a more substantive way. So going on to the next slide. So again, just to say, there's a broad range of tools out there. I did tell you I'd speak in a bit more detail about a few, and I know actually we have some folks on the phone that are far more expert than I, but Gabrielle will be actually speaking to a project that we did with the WOCAT team. I know we have Ingrid from the WOCAT team on the line that was looking at how we might create better connections between WOCAT, Trends.Earth, and Land PKS, Land Potential Knowledge System, Root Restoration Opportunities tool is up there. LADA, Clumondo, I mentioned, the Restoration Barometer from IUCN, CEPAL and Collect Earth, which are both key tools coming from FAO. So a broad range of different tools out there. And essentially what we're looking at through this toolbox is how can we help facilitate their use and help guide users through what types of tools might best support a particular decision context. Going on to the next slide. So what does LDN toolbox really mean? And I've spoken to some of this just briefly, but the definition that we've arrived at, and of course, keen to hear feedback on, is this idea of a modular suite of interoperable tools and data sets to help stakeholders measure, report, and monitor land degradation and plan to achieve land degradation neutrality. So again, just to call out that there's multiple audiences in here. Of course, reporting is key. Planning is key. At the same time, monitoring and evaluation, another key use. And you'll also likely have heard this referred to as a federated system. So what do we mean by federated? And I'm always sort of two minds with the term, because I think it's something that can confuse some folks, including myself, as to what we mean. But I think it really does get at the essence of what it is we're trying to build towards here with an LDN toolbox. So this idea of, rather than building a single tool to rule them all, we're really thinking about something, again, we're modular, so a set of different tools that can together accomplish an aim, something that's more distributed, not a single tool, so perhaps an interconnected set of nodes. And then I think this last bullet, and this is from actually a report that GEO-LDN supported in 2020, this idea of federation as different organizations or software brought together in such a way to create a coherent overall system. And again, in a moment, when I hand over to Gabrielle, he'll give one example of what the beginnings of this might look like from a project that we carried out with a number of collaborators. So if you've been following the conversation within GEO-LDN, you may have seen this diagram before. So this was sort of our version 1 view of what an LDN toolbox might look like. And so you've got here, and we're not going to belabor this, but you've got here, for example, code speaking to a package, OpenEO, which can then facilitate connecting to cloud interfaces, some computation outputs, then speaks to UNCCD Praise, which is their reporting tool. And this, again, not to say this is necessarily a bad idea, but what we recognize looking at this type of structure was it wasn't really the best way to harness all of the existing tools and knowledge that already exists in this space. This is more sort of a monolithic approach versus something that's more distributed and more open to that type of local interpretation and more responsive to context. So if we can go to the next slide. The way we're thinking about the LDN toolbox now is more akin, and just to the next slide, my mind may be slow, is more akin to this diagram that you see here on the right. And so again, we don't need to go into this in detail, but the idea here is rather than having that sort of flow chart, one system speaks to this system, speaks to this system, speaks to this system, speaks to this, gives you some product. What we're recognizing here is that there are already existing hubs around the world of activity related to LDN. And we really are trying to think about how we can better interconnect those in a way that best supports end users. So just to be more explicit, for example, we're connecting right now with RCMRD, Regional Center of Mapping of Resources for Development in Nairobi to leverage some of their work to support countries within their purview in Africa, building on some of the existing tools and capacity already in place there, while trying to think about how also it might better connect to some of the tools that I already mentioned earlier. So the idea here is rather than having a single place that's hosting tools or data sets and serving them out, what GEO-LDN instead can facilitate is something more akin to a catalog of the available tools, data sets, and resources, and then support interoperability among those tools and data sets. This isn't to say that, of course, there aren't gaps. We recognize that certainly there are and may be in this space. And so there certainly, when GEO-LDN identifies gaps where there may be need for further development, further facilitation, that's something, of course, we want to look at how we can best address those. And actually, one example of what we've done in the past was the competition that led to the creation of the Loop for LDN, the land use planning for land degradation neutrality tool, which Working Group 3 of GEO-LDN sponsored a competition around in early 2020. So here the role of GEO-LDN, again, is not to be the sole tool developer, but really to facilitate this space. What does this look like in practice? Of course, we want to build on the existing standards and approaches in this space, particularly around open data and responsiveness to users. So both FAIR and trust are, of course, two, and that's a link to the original Nature paper that led to this trust methodology. But the idea here is really to go as far as we can to ensure we're not reinventing the wheel, that we're facilitating reuse and interoperability among tools. And then, of course, this isn't all just about standards in terms of how we disseminate knowledge, but also standards in terms of how these tools actually can speak to each other. And that's where partners like OGC, of course, come into play, the open source geospatial consortium, who I think we have actually a person on the phone from NILS, but we've been in conversation with OGC about how we can best collaborate so that we can ensure that we're building on existing standards around interoperability among tools. So just coming back to this toolbox itself, what does it actually, I've talked a lot about how what we're trying to think through is how we can organize some of the existing knowledge and tools that exist in this space. So what framework do we actually use to do that? What you see on screen here is taken from a report. Peter Verberg, who was with the UNCCD Science Policy Interface, was the lead author of this report that came out around the time of the UNCCD COP last year. And what you see on screen in those inner gray boxes, highlighted in green, are 5 different phases of integrated land use planning / integrated land management. So phase 1, description and assessment. Phase 2, visioning and goal setting. Phase 3, planning. Phase 4, implementation, and then phase 5, monitoring and evaluation. And you'll see those arrows in the middle pointing among the different boxes. And this is basically acknowledging the reality that, well, A, this is typically a cycle in terms of how you might think about this in a project context. But of course, these aren't just hard and fast boxes locked off from each other. There's a lot of interconnections and feedbacks among these boxes. As you go through a project and get into implementation, you might need to return to the planning phase if you see challenges that you're encountering that need to lead to a change in how you might approach things. We all know this, of course, from being involved directly in projects. But the idea here is that we can focus on these 5 rough phases and use them to provide guidance about what types of different tools might fit into each of these boxes. And then those blue ovals, blue ovals on the outside are showing the different phases of the land degradation neutrality process as outlined in the LDN conceptual framework. So that's what those blue boxes are on the outside. So those likely will look familiar to some. So what does this actually look like in practice? Let's go on to the next slide. So what I'm going to do is, and again, this is by no means exhaustive, but this is just an example of what this might look like if you're trying to actually split out among these 5 different boxes that I showed before. And we've added actually one on the left in terms of the input data sets. So if we can go to the next slide, what you see highlighted here is, again, just that far left box around input data sets. And the idea here is that this is showing how, of course, through the work of the good practice guidance, which was supported by the UNCCD, the good practice guidance for assessing SDG 15.3.1, we already have an idea of input data sets available to support assessing SDG 15.3.1, and some default data sets have already been made available to countries as well through tools like WOCAT, Trans.Earth, CEPAL, and others. So that's the first key input here. You can go to the next. So if we're thinking about what this looks like in this sort of framework, when we're actually thinking about the assessment phase of a project and establishing a baseline, again, there's different tools that there are already to draw on. For example, there's Trans.Earth, which can be used to pull globally available data, and LAMPKS, which can be used to integrate information directly from the field. LAMPKS is a mobile app developed originally by the USDA, and actually you'll hear more about it in a moment from Gabriel. As we move on to that visioning phase, there's then other tools that might be brought into play. Loop for LDN, the land use planning for land degradation neutrality tool, can support land use planning exercises, including that counterbalancing mechanism of LDN I mentioned before. Clumondo is a land change modeling tool. It also can support that type of scenario process. As we go to planning, now when it gets down to actually thinking about what types, next slide, what types of actions we might actually be supporting through a project, there's tools like WOCAT, the World Overview of Conservation Approaches and Technologies, which can support understanding based on the characteristics of an area, what are the different types of approaches that might make sense. If we could go forward, I think it's actually 2 slides to implementation. Once we get to the implementation phase, and we're actually thinking about how we might optimize different areas for action to achieve LDN, there's tools like Root, like Loop for LDN, which can help support prioritizing areas for restoration or for different types of land use. And then lastly, on the last slide here, when we get to the monitoring and evaluation phase, there's tools like Trans.Earth that might support that final M&E process. Going on to the next slide. So just a few key points I want to highlight before I close out. So basically, what is this toolbox? So we're thinking of this again, not as the whole scale development of new tools, but it's really about linking to those existing tools that are in place. Again, there may be gaps that come up that we need to fill, but really thinking about how we can better connect the existing tools and approaches within this space to support users. In a second, I'll give you an example of what this looks like on the GEO-LDN website. Again, of course, we want to build on existing standards. And then lastly, and sorry, I'm speeding up a little bit because I realize I've been going over time. We will have further webinars and interconnection points with the LDN community to support the development of this process. We're very much at the beginning here, so very keen to hear feedback from folks. Next slide. So this is just showing if you go to that website, which I know was thrown already earlier in the chat. Next slide. There's a place on that website where if you go up to resources and tools, LDN toolbox, next slide, you'll see this page come up. And then you can actually click through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Those are the different phases that I just showed earlier. And if you click on one of those, let's go to the next slide, you'll see here, this is a list, and obviously this is just a screenshot. But were you to scroll down, you'd see a much broader list of the different tools that might support this phase. So that's all I have. So just want to thank everyone, of course, for the opportunity to present to you, and looking forward to hearing questions and feedback. Back to you, Antje.
Thank you, Alex, very much. I would propose to hand over to Gabriel right away and then take questions together after that. And Gabriel, you have the difficult task now to make up of time a little bit. Let's see how we work time-wise. So Gabriel is lead as land system scientist at Conservation International's Moore Center for Science, and he has been working with geospatial data applied to conservation since 2004, mostly focusing on tropical landscapes. Gabriel has solid experience with GIS, remote sensing, geospatial data science applied to environmental issues, such as fire, land use, and land cover change, and conservation-related analysis. Gabriel, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Antje. It's a pleasure to be here doing giving my share on the very first GEO-LDN seminar. I've seen so many familiar faces. Glad to see you guys. Thanks, Alex. I will do my best. Alex already presented some of the slides, some of the concepts. So if we can go to the next one. So we just saw these 5 phases. So this is the vision of the LDN toolbox, being an ecosystem of freely available and open source tools for assessing land degradation and establishing a baseline, setting targets, address current degradation, plan future land use, aiming to reach neutrality by 2030, and also at the very end monitor, and is an iterative process, so we can always go back in one of these phases and bring lessons learned. So if we can go to the next one. Today I'm going to be talking more about the subset of these tools that Alex presented already. So we're going to be talking about the Tools for LDN project that we had here at Conservation International. We are just about to wrap up this project with very successful results, I'm glad to say. So the original name is Strengthening Land Degradation Neutrality, Data and Decision Making through Free and Open Source and Open Access Platforms. And one of the major objectives of this project was to provide improved methods and tools for assessing land degradation. So if we can go to the next slide, please. In this project, Tools for LDN, we decided to pilot integration of TransEarth, which is the EO, the Earth Observation and Remote Sensing application that we developed at Conservation International, with Land PKS, Land Potential Knowledge System, which is this mobile app for field assessment and characterization of soil and land potential, and also with the WOCAT, the World Overview of Conservation Approaches and Technologies, which is a database of several approaches and technologies on sustainable land management, proven and tested around the globe. So the idea of Tools for LDN was how to integrate these 3 tools, open and free access tools, to assess baselines, go to the field and check what's going on, not only from what we can see from above using satellites, but also integrating and bringing information from the field, and also addressing the challenges that we have by implementing or suggesting implementations of the sustainable land management approach that are currently at WOCAT. Next, please. So what is TransEarth? We can go ahead, please. TransEarth is this geospatial tool that we developed here at Conservation International that allows and supports development of land degradation neutrality baselines, assisting also with target settings, enable analysis of database in support of reporting to UNCCD. So several users of TransEarth actually use it to report and to get results and report to UNCCD under SDG 1531. And the tool also allows implementation of use of best available local information. So for those countries who have finer spatial resolution data sets and are willing to use those data sets, we can also, TransEarth also allows them to bring this local information and use the local capacity, processing capacity of their computers to process data. Next, please. So TransEarth brings the power of cloud computing. So we are able to run analysis at global scale at some parts, but also bringing local information. There's several steps there. If you can go move ahead, please. So it's just one more. Yeah. So this is the current graphical interface of TransEarth. It looks fairly different from the previous version, from the previous reporting period. We have new functions, and the new interface is it's very easy to navigate. If you can go first, you can go next, please. And it allows us to generate maps representing where land degradation is happening, but also tables summarizing the information and making life easier for countries to report to UNCCD. We can go ahead quite a few steps there, please. Yeah, so here are the maps for Kenya, for instance, where we have purple representing land degradation and green representing improvement and yellow stable lands. And if we go one step ahead, we can see the tables summarizing all the information. Yeah, we can move ahead, please. Here is just a quick introduction to WOCAT, which is a global network on sustainable land management. Next, please. So it's a global database and a network established in '92 and has been collecting and creating this database on sustainable land management applicable everywhere in the globe. And in 2014, WOCAT has been officially recognized by the UNCCD as the primary source for SLM practices. Next, please. They have over 2,000 practices and technologies already included in their catalog. Users can filter by keywords and looking for specific locations, climate, vegetation types, and so on. So if we can move ahead, please. I think there's some animations there as well. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe I have another I think I have a duplicated slide there. So if we can go ahead, please. Yes. So and the database can be interlinked with national project and global platforms through API. So this concept of interoperability, so WOCAT already has an API that allows the tools to connect to each other and chat to each other. Next, please. And finally, the Land Potential Knowledge System, which is a mobile phone technologies for sustainable land management, is a platform. It's a cell phone. Next, please. Is a cell phone application where users can interactively determine soil texture, for instance, understand the land potential or the foundation of the soil. They are currently willing to use as to plant sugarcane, for instance, so they can better understand how much that soil is going to comport the type of activities they wanted to develop in this land. Next, please. Users can also measure vegetation and land cover, so they can interactively, when in the field, they can feed in information to help us characterize some vegetation and land cover, not only to complement what we can see from the sky, from the space, actually. Next, please. They can also, there's several other features implemented in LandPKS. The idea here is not to show you everything that LandPKS can do, but again, users can, while in the field, predict available water holding, helping them to make the best decisions about how to best use their lands. Next. So the toolsfelding workflow was this idea of how to integrate field applications such as LandPKS, Earth observation applications, and geospatial data applications such as TransEarth, and this large database of sustainable land management from WOCAT. So we can assess what's going on prior to going to the field. So we can use Earth observation through TransEarth to apply the workflow that Alex just presented, the three sub-indicators, land cover change, land productivity change, and carbon soil change through soil organic carbon. And then we can have a map representing the current status of the land. We can go to the field, use LandPKS to better characterize the land. And then once we identify some challenges and some degraded lands there, we can apply the sustainable land management practices and technologies suggested by WCAT and cataloging the WCAT. Next, please. Here's a more details on how we can implement the tools for LDN workflow. But if for sake of time, we can skip this one, please. If we can go to the next one. So here's an example. So we could see, yeah, let's. So what we've done with tools for LDN, we implemented a backend integration of LandPKS and WCAT, sustainable land management practices. So users can go to the field and have access to over 100 technologies that is currently present and available through WCAT. We have also integrated LandPKS and TransEarth, so users can also have access to some of the data sets and information that we provide through LandPKS, through TransEarth, and then users can interact and go back and correct some false positives and negatives given some information that they've collected when doing field work. Or they can also have access to these sustainable land management practices and start addressing the degraded lands that they have verified in the field. Next, please. So here's a quick example how the LandPKS screen looks like. So we do have information on soil information from FAO and ISRIC. We have some 100 plus sustainable land management practices through the WCAT function there, and also TransEarth. So if we go one next. So this is more information. So this is how the TransEarth field of LandPKS would look when going to the field and verifying the information. So we have greenness. So here we have a time series from 2000 to 2020. How the NDVI, the normalized difference vegetation index, behaved over time, precipitation, so how much precipitation we had on average each year. Here at the bottom, we have these color-coded boxes where we can see that at the beginning of the time series, the land was occupied by forest, and then in 2003, 2004, it was changed, it was converted to crop, and then it has remained stable since 2003. So that's the land use of this specific field. And we also have a spatial context here based on Landsat imagery. Next. And here is how users can interact with the WCAT database through the LandPKS. So the idea here is like we have information, spatial information representing greenness, precipitation, and also land use. But also once users identify the type of land degradation or the type of which sustainable land managements could be applied in that specific location, they have access through the LandPKS mobile application. Next. So just a few more screens showing how these three tools, WCAT, TransEarth, and LandPKS have been integrated, so to make life a little bit easier for users when implementing field trip. Next. That's all I had to present today. I would like to thank you for your attention and time, and special thanks to NewSeams, Ingrid Teich, and Jeff Herrick for allowing us to use some of their slides. This is a project effort, a group effort. So thank you so much for your partnership in this project. Over to you, Antje.
Thank you very much, Gabriel and Alex, for those great insights into how a federated system, you didn't even mention this word, I think, how the LDN toolbox and can look like, and how tools for LDN already implemented some interoperable workflows for different tools that are targeting combating land degradation. We are a bit over time, so we have 6 minutes left for discussion and some concluding remarks. I would propose that I take one question and then Bernd would do concluding remarks, and anyone who is able to stay, take 10 minutes longer, can stay. We will stay, some of us at least will stay here to take more questions or to continue the discussion, but that we have the closing at around 4. And I would, if there is, so any one of you who, the aim of the seminars is to bring in the different communities, right? And now we had a presentation from the technical Earth observations community. So therefore, I would love if there are questions from the land use planning community, I would love to prioritize a question from those who turned on the camera from the land use planning community in the beginning, a reaction of, a question or anything. So I would just see if there's a hand up from someone from that community.
If no one is raising their hand, or if someone raises their hand, there's also a question right now in the chat, which I hope that one of our presenters could answer, such as Bernd, Alex, or Gabriel. Alex is shaking his head yes, so I know he's already working on it. So please do raise your hands to ask a question to Antje during this time.
So if there's none from that community, I open it up to anyone. So you have the privilege to ask one question now before Bernd is doing the closing.
I see one question on global coverage of the data sets. Yes, we do. I'm not sure if I'm understanding the question correctly, but we do have global data sets representing land cover. Yeah, so Alex was just addressing that. We do have global data sets representing land cover, land productivity, and soil organic carbon at global scale. Of course, we would have like a little bit coarser spatial resolution on those data sets. So it's about 250 meters, 300 meters. But we are currently working to bring these down to 10 meters spatial resolution. Of course, we're going to miss the time series because Sentinel data sets, Sentinel imagery is available since 2017, and at global scale, at 5 days revisiting time since 2018. So we are working to bring the biophysical variables that we work down to a finer spatial resolution, but there are some challenges that we would like to address and would very much appreciate the help of this community to address.
Thank you so much. So I would just hand over to Bernd now so that you will hear about how to get involved, and any other questions we will remain here for a couple of more minutes. So Nanda, can you share the slides again? So I would introduce Bernd, who is also part of the GEO-LDN Secretariat. He is the Earth Observation Advisor here, and he is a geographer and ecologist by background with more than 20 years of professional experience in Europe, Africa, and Asia, focusing on land tenure, regularization, and spatial planning. So he also has solid experience on GIS, remote sensing, and geospatial data analysis applied to environmental issues such as land use and land cover change. And Bernd, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Antje. Also, a big thanks to Alex and Gabriel once more. I think it was really interesting to see how the concept of the LDN toolbox evolved and how it is being put into practice already. So we want to end this first webinar by talking a little bit about how you can get involved in the GEO-LDN flagship. There are several opportunities to do so. One is, of course, to receive updates through the mailing list, and a lot of you are taking advantage of that opportunity already. The second opportunity is to showcase one of your examples in one of the next online seminars. So you could be one of our next presenters, and if you would like to do that, please get in touch with us through the mentioned email address of info@geo-ldn.org. If you have questions about the mentioned global network for ILUP, which is one part of it is the LinkedIn group, please also get in touch with us. And you mentioned there is a postgraduate program at the UENR, the University of Energy and Natural Resources in Ghana. If you would like to be a guest lecturer for one of the online courses, there is that opportunity. Also, very important, those postgraduate students need internship positions. And if your institution is able to offer internship positions, let us know, please. If you would like to engage in any of our activities, including those of the working groups, let us know. Anja mentioned those 3 working groups in the beginning, and these working groups are very important to stay in touch with practical implementation of our work. Next slide, please. So next steps and more specific chances how you can become involved. One, Alex showed you the toolbox, the LDN toolbox as it is represented on our website at the moment, and we would like to develop a more interactive representation of the toolbox. For instance, add search filters, enabling you to look for certain tools which match the planning phase you're into or the project type you want to implement. And we're doing some requirements analysis for this in the coming month. And if you would like to be involved in that, if you have some previous experience in designing interfaces like that, that would be very helpful. A second chance to become involved is we want to make use of the LDN toolbox in some projects or in some countries in Africa, and we're using the Capacity Accelerator Network of the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data. Some of GPSTD, some colleagues might be even here in the webinar today. So the Global Partnership has developed this process where partner countries can apply. There's a 3-month training period, which we support from the angle of LDN and spatial planning. Afterwards, fellows are sent to the partner countries for 6 months to support the process of developing LDN-related use cases. Within the country, those teams of different government and non-governmental authorities, organizations, they come together and they develop, based on the idea of a tool case, they develop the corresponding workflow. So meaning putting different tools together, letting tools talk to one each other in this way, as Alex and Gabriel have shown the toolbox to work. So if this process of the capacity accelerator network, will need the backstopping of the working groups as part of the process. And if you're interested in helping us out in that regard, we're most happy to have you on board. So with those few remarks, let me go to the next slide, please. And yeah, a big thank you again. Here you see some of the faces or most of the faces who are involved in GEO-LDN, either on the stage or behind the scenes, through the leads group and the secretariat. And I wanted to use this opportunity to thank you all for taking time to attend. And of course, we would like to see you again. So yeah, next slide. Please stay tuned for our next seminar in April. It's probably towards the second half of April. And we will announce it through the same channels, again, through the LinkedIn group, through Twitter, through the mailing list. So please stay in touch and hope to see you again for the next seminar. All the best to you. Bye-bye.